My name is Rebecca Hayes. The moment that still burns in my chest happened at my own father's retirement celebration. I walked up to the gate, only to be told my name wasn't on the list because he had erased it. And when I looked over, he didn't even deny it. He just smirked, as if I'd never been his daughter, never been part of this family, never been worthy of the Navy bloodline he worshipped. That was the day I discovered the story my family had written for me, forgotten, dismissed, unwanted, was about to shatter, because I carried a truth on my shoulders they could never erase. It was still early when I walked up to the military base in Virginia Beach, the spring air crisp enough to sting my lungs. The hall was already alive with banners, polished brass, and the hum of talks from officers and families filing inside. I kept my head high as I reached the security gate, my invitation folded nicely in my hand, though the paper itself looked tired and faded compared to the glossy envelopes others carried. The young guard read the list on his iPad, then turned the screen toward me. My name wasn't there. Rebecca Hayes erased as if I had never existed. His face was professional but sorry, and yet the words cut sharper than any blade. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not on the list." Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of my father a few yards away. He was surrounded by fellow officers, his stance straight, his laugh easy, as though this was his victory parade. His eyes flicked in my direction for a heartbeat, then slid past me like I was a stranger waiting for a bus. He didn't even have to talk. That look told me everything. I wasn't supposed to be here. Through the glass doors of the hall, I could see my brother Michael in his perfect white uniform, shaking hands with admirals, his smile dazzling under the lights. Cameras clicked, as if he were the very embodiment of the Hay heritage. The applause that rippled through the room for him felt like a deliberate reminder of my absence. For a moment, the old ache rose in my chest, the same one that had haunted me since youth. The feeling of being the invisible kid, the one who never fit the family plan. But standing there at the gate, the sting of shame fresh in my veins, I knew I wouldn't turn away this time. I walked back toward the car lot, steady and deliberate. When I opened the trunk of my car, the truth lay waiting inside. My dress whites were folded with care, the metal stars wrapped carefully in cloth. I opened the garment bag and let my hand rest on the crisp fabric. No one in that hall knew. Not my father, not my brother, no one. What they had removed from the guest list was nothing compared to what they were about to see, written on my shoulders. 3 stars that carried 15 years of silence, sacrifice, and victories they could never understand.
Constitutional law professor from a top-tier law school offered the most complex take. The judge was within his power, the defense was within their rights to push back. Both things can be true. What matters now is what the appeals court says. If there is an appeal, that's where the real standard gets set. The legal agreement, and this is rare to see, seems to be this judge walked a tightrope, and whether he made it across depends on who you ask. Smash that like button if this law breakdown is helping you understand what's really at stake here. It's more than just courtroom theater. It's about how our entire justice system works. Like if you want more analysis like this. So what does this actually mean for you specifically? Right now, law teams across the country are watching this case. According to legal news sources, at least a dozen high-profile trials currently underway have defense teams employing similar tactics, playing the cameras, referencing outside investigations, pushing political narratives. But here's the thing, if you ever end up in court for anything, this affects you directly. Here's how. The balance between aggressive advocacy and courtroom order decides whether you get a fair trial or a circus. If courts crack down too hard, your attorney can't fight for you. If they're too lenient, the other side turns the courtroom into a media event at your cost. Trials that turn into political theater take longer, much longer. According to judicial efficiency studies, hearings with excessive attorney misconduct last 40% longer on average. What does that mean for your wallet? Longer trials mean higher costs for everyone, including taxpayers funding public defenders and court processes. If you're ever involved in civil lawsuits, every extra day in court is money out of your pocket. If you're a business owner, a landlord, or anyone who might end up in civil court, you should care deeply about judicial speed. Here's the bigger picture that should worry all of us, regardless of where you stand politically. If this judge's method becomes standard, it means cleaner trials, but also more judicial power over attorney conduct. Every time you hire a lawyer, the judge's temperament counts as much as your attorney's skill. Let me give you a real case. Imagine you're wrongly accused of something. Your attorney wants to explain the political background of why you're being targeted. The judge says, "No, that's political speech." Now your defense is restricted. That's not fear-mongering. That's the legal fact of expanded judicial discretion. Now, I'm not giving legal advice, but here's what informed people are thinking. If you're ever called for jury service in a high-profile case, understand that what happens inside the courtroom is often different from what makes the news. If you're ever a party in a trial, ask your attorney personally, what's this judge's reputation for courtroom control? Follow judicial elections in your jurisdiction, because who sits on the bench decides how these balances get struck. And here's what nobody in mainstream news wants to say out loud. We want judges to control their courtrooms.
There was Iron Shield, the operation that kept me awake for 36 straight hours as we uncovered a cyber attack aimed at crippling a carrier strike group. If we had failed, 5,000 sailors could have been left adrift, blind in hostile seas. We succeeded, and the ship sailed on, business as usual. No one ever knew. Then there was Quiet Echo. A SEAL team was stuck behind enemy lines, their comms jammed, time running out. I moved a satellite from another theater of war, buying them the coverage they needed to escape. They made it back alive, but no one asked how. Their life was chalked up to luck. I was never part of the story. And Midnight Falcon, a freighter disguised in the Pacific, bringing radioactive cargo that could have sparked an international disaster. With MI6 and the Australian Navy, I coordinated the intercept, neutralized the danger, and kept it out of the headlines. When dawn broke over the water, the world never even knew how close it had come to chaos. The awards that followed were locked in drawers. The combinations came in sealed boxes. My proudest treasures weren't the ones with ribbons or signatures, but a single handwritten note from a SEAL I'd never met. "We're living because of you." A man never forgets that. I kept it tucked away in a drawer, proof that my work mattered even when no one said it aloud. Pride lived in me, yes, but it was accompanied by a deep loneliness, because while I carried those victories, I could never share them with the people who should have counted most. My father, my mother, my brother, none of them ever knew. To them, I was just the daughter who pushed papers behind a desk. And that was the cruelest twist of all. They never once thought that the very ceremonies they celebrated, the legacies they boasted about, were only possible because of the unseen work I did in the shadows. I slipped quietly into the hall, keeping to the shadows near the back row. My outfit stayed folded in the trunk of my car. For now, I wore only plain clothes, unnoticeable among the polished whites and blues around me. The room was hushed and reverent, banners hanging from the high ceiling, medals gleaming under the lights. Every detail screamed ceremony, custom, and pride. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat and started into a glowing speech about the Hayes family, calling us a model of naval legacy. The words made my stomach twist. Applause thundered as Michael stood in his dress whites, broad smile shining. The picture-perfect cop my father had always paraded. Each clap felt like a hammer hitting down the message that he and only he carried the Hayes name forward. When the MC spoke of all the children of Captain Hayes, my name never passed his lips. The absence wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, planned. My chest burned as whispers rose around me. "Rebecca, isn't she the one who just does office work? She's not really military. Not like her brother." The words cut sharper than any scolding, each one a warning that my own family had written me out of their story. Then, almost imperceptibly, a different kind of sound reached me. A small group of young officers sitting nearby leaned toward one another. "I've seen her name in a secret report. Rebecca Hayes. Could it be her?" The disbelief in their words was tinged with something else: recognition. For the first time I understood there were cracks in the wall my father had built to keep me invisible. People outside the family knew, even if they couldn't say it aloud. But the deepest blow came when I found a stray folder on a side table, left carelessly among the wedding programs. My eyes scanned the page. A private memo regarding the guest list. At the bottom was my father's autograph. It was his hand that had ensured my name would not appear. His words written in black and white. "Omit Rebecca Hayes. Do not detract from Michael's fame." The sting of deception burned through me. My own father had erased me. Not by chance, not by oversight, but by choice. For a moment, I felt small again, that forgotten girl, standing at the edge of family pictures. But something changed as I sat there in the back row. Anger hardened into resolve. I refused to let them keep writing this story for me. This time, the truth would walk into the room, whether they accepted it or not. I stepped into the hallway to breathe, the glossy wood floor echoing softly under my shoes. The air out here was cooler, quieter, but not enough to drown out the voices coming from around the corner. I froze when I recognized Michael's voice. "If Rebecca shows up," he whispered anxiously to a fellow officer, "she'll take everything from me. She always has, even when no one noticed. I can't let that happen." His words were heavy with despair, his usual confidence taken away. His friend gave a tight, uncomfortable laugh, offering no reply. But the look on Michael's face, worry etched into every line, told me more than his words ever could. He wasn't proud of me. He wasn't uncaring. He was scared. That moment snapped everything into focus. It wasn't just my father who had worked to erase me. My brother, too, had lived in fear of the truth about me. The two men who should have stood beside me had instead become partners in my eraser, bound not by pride, but by fear of being overshadowed. I slid my hand into the pocket of my coat, fingers brushing against the folded letter from a seal I had saved long ago. The ink was smudged, but the words still held weight. "We're living because of you. A man never forgets that." My grip tightened around it, as I whispered to myself, "The truth doesn't need me to shout. It will speak for itself." The pain of their betrayal sunk deeper, but so did my clarity. They didn't want me here because they knew. They knew if I stepped into the light, I would eclipse them without saying a single word. And that was exactly what I planned to do. The wind off the Virginia Beach shoreline whipped through the parking lot, bringing the salt of the ocean and the faint echo of distant gulls. I opened my car door and slid inside, the noise of the event muffled behind layers of steel and glass. On the seat lay the clothing bag I had carried with me, untouched until now. I unzipped it with steady hands, showing the pristine white of my dress uniform. Every crease was sharp, every line exact, the product of years of discipline no one in my family had ever recognized. I buttoned each clasp carefully, as if fastening every slight, every dismissal, every wound I had carried. 15 years of silence and suffering sealed into fabric. When I pinned the 3 polished silver stars onto my shoulders, the weight settled differently, not as a burden, but as proof. I caught my image in the rearview mirror. Gone was the woman who had been erased from family pictures, written out of stories, left standing at the gate like a stranger. The face looking back at me was Rear Admiral Rebecca Hayes, and there was no mistaking her. My phone vibrated on the console, the screen flashing with a safe-coded message. I opened it quickly. "We know they didn't invite you. Remember, your presence means more than they want to admit." The words squeezed my chest. My bosses knew. They saw. They wanted me there, even when my own blood didn't. I drew in a deep breath, my hand resting briefly over the stars on my shoulder. "Not for vengeance," I whispered to myself, "but to step into the light." And with that I opened the door, the wind grabbing the edge of my cover as I prepared to walk back inside. The air inside the hall was heavy with ceremony. Every eye turned toward the stage, where the master of ceremonies was prepared to introduce my father. His voice rang out with rehearsed dignity, the kind meant to frame a man's life as a success. The crowd sat perfectly still, 100 uniforms in sharp rows, every breath synchronized in silence. Then I pushed open the doors. The sound of them swinging shut behind me carried farther than I expected, a ripple through the quiet. I walked forward, each step measured, heels hitting the polished floor with the steady beat of a drum. Heads turned, conversations faltered. At first, no one quite believed what they were seeing, until one voice cut through the quiet. A SEAL, older, battle-worn, the lines on his face etched deep, the task where my decisions had saved his team. His chair scraped back as he rose to his feet, chest high, voice loud. "Admiral Hayes, front row." For a split second, the hall froze. Then, the waves started, one by one. Then all at once, 300 SEALs stood in perfect unity, the thunder of their chairs booming like cannon fire. The sound rolled across the hall, shaking the walls, rattling the chandeliers. The MC's hand shook. The microphone slipped from his grip and crashed against the floor with a sharp shriek. He stood motionless, the script in his hand suddenly useless. I caught sight of my father. The glass of wine he had lifted mid-toast hung motionless in his hand. His face had drained of color, eyes wide in shock, frozen in a pause that spoke louder than any speech he could have given. Michael, on the other hand, looked as though the ground had moved beneath him. His lips parted, but no sound came. Fear and disbelief twisting across his features. I kept going, unhurried, my steps echoing like the toll of a bell. Every pair of eyes in the room followed, drawn not by demand, but by truth. I didn't wave. I didn't recognize the shock. I simply advanced. The sparkling stars glinting under the lights. The hall had been their stage, their heritage, their story. But with every step I took, it was rewritten. And for the first time, the truth spoke for itself. The hall had gone utterly still. 300 seals, locked in tight salute. The light from the chandeliers glinting against the crisp white of my outfit. Every breath in the room seemed to hold, waiting for what I would do next. I didn't falter. My heels clicked steadily as I moved down the center aisle, the crowd parting without a word, the quiet heavier than any anthem. At the front row I paused, turned, and lowered myself elegantly into an empty seat. The act alone changed the balance of the entire room. I didn't need a microphone or a speech. The truth was already written across the 3 silver stars that caught every eye. One by one, top officers rose from their tables and approached. A vice admiral with a chest full of ribbons grasped my hand tightly. His voice pitched low. It's good to finally meet the name behind those stories. Another followed and then another, each handshake carrying the weight of recognition I had been denied for years. Finally, a 3-star commander leaned close. His words meant only for me. If it weren't for you, ceremonies like this wouldn't even happen. His tone was steady, but the thanks in his eyes cut through me sharper than any applause. From the corner of my vision, I saw my father stuck in place, the glass of wine trembling slightly in his hand, as though he couldn't decide whether to hold on to it or let it fall. Michael sat hunched forward, gaze locked on the floor, unable or unwilling to lift his eyes to me. Their silence screamed louder than the words that had erased me. I folded my cover neatly into my lap, my stance unflinching, my face calm. I didn't stand to address the room, didn't explain or defend. I didn't need to. Sitting there, fully seen, fully obvious, was the answer they had spent decades trying to avoid. And then it came, a single clap, timid at first, then another, then a swell that filled the hall. Applause rose in waves, not summoned by the MC, not prompted by tradition, but pulled from the crowd by something they could no longer deny. For the first time in my life, I wasn't erased, overlooked, or forgotten. For the first time, the story couldn't move on without me at its heart. As the ceremony dissolved and guests moved toward the exits, members trailed behind me, eyes still fixed where I sat. Michael approached first, his voice unsteady, almost breaking. "How long have you been hiding this?" I met his eyes, steady and unflinching. The number hung in the air, heavy enough to knock the breath from him. He stumbled back a half step, exhaling like a man finally crushed under a truth he had avoided. Then my father came. He said nothing. His eyes lingered on the stars at my shoulders, tracing every seam of the uniform he had once thought impossible for me. His hand twitched around the glass he still held, but he didn't speak a single word. Instead, after a long, taut pause, he gave one slow, measured nod. It wasn't an apology. It didn't erase decades of dismissal, but it was recognition, real, undeniable recognition. For the first time in my life, and in that silence, his nod admitted more than any words ever could. He had been wrong. 6 months later, I found myself back in Norfolk, the old house untouched. The air inside carried the warm, familiar smell of my mother's roast. The flag outside the window still worn from years of wind and sun. In the living room, the glass cabinet that had once featured Michael's Naval Academy portrait now held one of my medals. Its band of red and blue was perfectly straight, catching the light with quiet pride. For the first time, my story had a place in this house. At dinner, My father leaned forward, his words stripped of formality. He asked about the logistics of leading intelligence teams across countries, his tone marked by genuine curiosity instead of polite dismissal. My mother listened closely, smiling in a way that felt lighter than before. Michael sat quietly, quieter than ever, his fork still, his eyes softer. No rivalry, no defense, just respect. Later, driving away beneath the dark Virginia sky, I caught my image in the rearview mirror. No shadow stayed there anymore. What I saw was whole, steady, undeniable. I smiled and whispered to myself. The biggest acknowledgement never came from them. It was always within me, and today I claimed it for.